Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so I'm going to be saying something in this video that I may have said in one or two previous videos, such as my video MGTOW Disproven, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's a really important thing to understand, because I think MGTOW doesn't understand this point. And this point is that I don't think XXers will ever become prostitutes en masse unless all XY people are poor. But even then, XXers would just become the mistresses of top men. They would not become prostitutes. A father would much rather that his daughter live at home and sponge off of him for the rest of her life, rather than go out and be a prostitute. So why would she be a prostitute? You know, her father would much rather she live at home, so she'll want to live at home. Like, being a prostitute is a shameful thing. Even if tons of women are doing it, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions, it's still a shameful thing. It's still a thing that she doesn't want to do. It's still a thing that, you know, kind of destroys her soul, so she doesn't want to be a prostitute. She would even people who, you know, XXers, even XXers who, you know, sleep with a lot of XY people, even these people, you know, see something shameful in being a prostitute. So no, women will not become prostitutes in huge numbers when, you know, MGTOW becomes a huge thing. And these women will just live at home because their father would much rather that her do that, you know. And even if it's a promiscuous culture, it's still shameful to be a prostitute. You know, the word whore is still an insult that is thrown around because men have a natural aversion to, you know, XXers who sleep with a lot of guys. All men and all XXers know this. Why would fathers let their daughter be a prostitute instead of living at home for the rest of her life? Assuming that XXers can't find men to take care of them, either because of all men going MGTOW or because of all men being unemployed or too poor to support a wife and a kid due to his job paying a very low wage. Whatever the cause is, if XXers cannot find men to marry them and or even just take care of them, if XXers can't find anyone to take care of them, like a boyfriend or a husband, she'll just live with her father again. Automation eliminating tons of jobs will mean that XXers living at home will mean more XXers will be living at home because of being unable to find a man to take care of her. Even if XXers all get out of the workforce, there will still be tons of XXers who can't find a man. But these XXers will not become prostitutes. They'll just live at home. But these XXers will still want love and sex, and so these XXers might have boyfriends. But maybe they'll all only have top 10% boyfriends. Or, you know, so the top 10% of men will each have, you know, 3, 4, maybe even 7 girlfriends. Right? Maybe the top 20 to 30% of XXers will have top 10% boyfriends, sharing those boyfriends with other XXers. And maybe the 20% of XXers below that 20 or 30% at the top, maybe that other 20% of XXers below them will also, you know, date top men, but they'll be dating the 10% of men who are below the top 10% of men, right? Making up the entire 20% of men, top 20% of men. And so on and so forth, right? Maybe leading to the bottom 10 to 30% of XXers being involuntarily single, unable to get sex, unable to get love, and the bottom 50 to 70% of men being unable to get love, unable to get sex, etc. But I don't think it's going to go well for men when XXers start getting out of the workforce, because I don't think XXers will start getting out of the workforce until it's too late. Until there are hardly any jobs left for men. So XXers won't be leaving the workforce early. They'll just be unable to find jobs because of automation taking jobs. And then XXers will stop fighting to get a job, and then the few jobs that remain will be left to only men. But maybe there will be a huge percentage of XY people who can't find jobs at all. Maybe 50 to 70% of XY people can't find jobs at that point because of all the low IQ jobs having been taken by robots and computers and such. You know, automation. And then these XY people will have, you know, IQs too low to do any of the jobs that have not yet been taken by automation. So then you'll have a huge percentage of XY people not working, and most or all XXers not working either. You know, XXers are also very family oriented, and XXers really care about what their father and brothers think of them, especially their father and mother. And I don't think that many mothers would want their daughter being a prostitute. I think most mothers would pressure their husband into letting their daughter live at home forever rather than letting her be a prostitute. Not that the mother will actually have the pressure, not that the mother will actually have to pressure her husband to allow their daughter to live at home. He too will be in agreement. He'll be like, hell yeah, I want my daughter living at home rather than being a prostitute. So, you know, both parents will want her living at home, so she's not going to have to be a prostitute. You know, even if it's 90% of women not working, that means, you know, it will be fine with their parents for that to be the case. I'm not saying that that'll be the case, but Well, yeah, I mean, eventually it will, but not now. But like, yeah, 90 or maybe even 100%, or almost 100% of XXers will get out of the workforce and live at home. Why wouldn't they? Right? Maybe only the top 1% of XXers who are really smart, really talented, earn a ton of money. Yeah, sure, those XXers will keep working, because they're making a ton of money. They got status, they're famous, or they love their job or whatever. But 99%, maybe more than 99, maybe 99.99% of XXers will eventually get out of the workforce, but maybe not until 50 to 70 or even 80% of XY people are out of the workforce too because of automation, So, young XXers in their 20s, teens, 20s, and 30s will rather live at home than be prostitutes. And so that's another reason why XXers will live at home instead of being prostitutes, so that prostitution never becomes a hugely widespread thing to where 50 or 70 or 80 or 90% of women are doing that thing. That's just not going to happen, I don't think. How in the world do MGTOW men think that all men are going to be able to get sex when all men are being promiscuous? Marriage will be untenable because of the misandric laws. XXers will have little interest in just having sex with XY people, and even if XXers are interested in having sex with XY people without the XYer giving her any kind of provision or commitment or anything, it'll result in just the top XYers getting that sex, not middle class or lower class XYers getting sex. And so the only way MGTOW can work is if a lot of XXers become prostitutes, which won't happen for the reason I stated, or the law collapses so much that prostitution is being engaged in even though it's illegal. But again, why would that happen? Same reason it won't happen, for the same reason as I mentioned before. But fathers are not going to let their daughters, do that. So, there'll still be a massive shortage of sex when all XY people have gone MGTOW. Because of and once all XXers have gotten out of the workforce, there'll still be, no little prostitution. I mean, maybe way more than we have now, but still not probably anywhere near enough to meet the sexual needs of all XY people. Or even if it is enough, it'll have to be done with a very small percentage of XXers being prostitutes. Because most of them will not be prostitutes, because they'll be getting nothing out of it, And plus, there will not be very many. Well, I think I talk about this later. I'll talk about that later. There'll still be a shortage of sex, probably. So the incel problem will still probably get worse and worse and worse until it results in massive violence, such as civil war, revolutionary war, or a war by incel men who might be 50 to 70% of men at that time. A war by incel men to forcibly exsanguinate all the top, 15 or 30% of men. All the men getting laid will be, people who the incel men will be trying to forcibly exsanguinate, So, the top men will still be getting sex because the XXers will still be putting out for top men. But, the bottom 50 to 70% of men who are all incels, they'll all be trying to exsanguinate those top men. And you really think top men can win a war when it's only, 30% of those guys, having sex? And then the maybe there's another 10 or 20 or 30% of guys who have, girlfriends who can make money and support a girlfriend or maybe one kid, but they're not being promiscuous. They're not a top guys, so they're not making a ton of money. Right? But the guys, the bottom 50 to 70% of guys who are incels will see those top, 10% of men or so, or top 20% or whoever, who are really promiscuous, and we'll see those guys as the absolute epitome of all evil, who are turning them into incels. And then those incel guys will literally wage a literal war to literally exterminate, to utterly forcibly exsanguinate every single guy who's having sex with more than one woman. Those incel guys will probably spare the 10 to 30% of guys who are married or have a girlfriend but aren't being promiscuous, but they're not going to spare any of the top guys who are having sex with multiple women. Not a single one will be spared. And this is what we're heading to. I mean, this is just, I think, an objective fact. And the only thing that can stop it is doing sperm bank sperm breeding so that, the kids and grandkids have higher IQs so that they can all have jobs so the society doesn't collapse because of joblessness, because there being all these jobs that can't be filled because of, all these people having IQs too low and all these people who want jobs, but there are no jobs for them because all the jobs require IQs that are too high. So, we're going to have the worst of both worlds soon, in terms of a ton of people needing jobs and a ton of jobs needing to be filled, but neither of those things meeting because all the jobs require high IQs and all the people needing jobs, which will be a huge percentage of the population, 50 to 70% of the population, all those people will have, 100 IQs or lower, or 105 and lower, or whatever. So they can't fill any of the jobs that need filling. You see, this is going to be a worst of both worlds situation. It'll be utterly apocalyptic for the society. And the only way to stop that is by making sure our kids and grandkids have higher IQs by doing sperm bank sperm breeding en masse. That's the only way to stop it. And the only way to be immune from this horror is to form your own community that either utterly rejects taxes and gardens and supports itself through gardening, and therefore doesn't need to buy anything outside the community, and therefore can survive, even though everybody in the no-go zone, or most people in the no-go zone, have low IQs and can't get a job. They can garden still, so they can survive. That's the only way to survive without doing the sperm bank sperm breeding thing. But if you want to thrive and keep freedom alive and fight back against tyranny and all that, and have people in the commune smart enough so that they can influence the direction of technology, so freedom increases and tyranny decreases instead of the other way around, with tyranny increasing and freedom decreasing until it eventually affects the no-go zone, because it affects the very crops that they're breeding and stuff, because of more than genetic engineering of crops, but like all kinds of totally sci-fi stuff you can't even imagine now. Like, if you want that stuff not to happen, to where the infection spreads, the tyranny spreads literally on the wind in the form of like seeds or pollen or whatever, and then that infecting the food, and then the food you eat infects your genes, and then your genes change, and now you're genetically engineered because the food you ate, because the food is corrupted, because of the seeds are blowing across in the wind into the no-go zone. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't view even a no-go zone as totally immune to the tyranny. Even the Amish are forced to put those orange stickers on the back of their carts. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court or something like that, and they said, yeah, you got to do this for safety of the road for everybody else. So they didn't want to do that, but it affected them. The tyranny outside in the outside world did affect them. They do have to wear those orange stickers on their little carts, on their little buggies when they're going down the road. So think about that, but in a way more advanced, a biological type of way in the future, how you're going to be biologically enslaved if you don't drive back the tyranny all over the world, and especially in your own country. And the only way to do that is by having a bunch of high IQ people in your community. And the only way to do that is to form a no-go zone and do sperm bank sperm breeding, so you have a bunch of high IQ people that can do subversive coding. Coding is the new creation. Coding is the new space. So the only way to create freedom is online. And the only way to do it is to have a bunch of high IQ people who are freedom-oriented and brave and live in a part of the country that's immune from the government, so they can't be assassinated, can't be arrested, etc. So those people can do subversive coding to their heart's delight. And then that infects the whole world, just like Bitcoin did. But infects it in a good way, so that everybody gets more free, instead of the government locking everything down and then infecting even biology and food itself, so that everybody gets enslaved. Which is going to come down the pike eventually, I don't know, 50 to 100 years from now, maybe 150 years from now, but it's coming. So either you're rolling back tyranny, or tyranny's rolling over you. It's one or the other, It's true that all XXers being prostitutes would not drive down male wages, other than the wages of bisexual male prostitutes who have both male and female clients. Men cannot be prostitutes for XXers because there's no demand, because the sex drive of XXers is far lower. So this means that, women, XXers being prostitutes don't drive down men's wages because they're doing a job that only XXers can do. But just because it would not drive down men's wages if all XXers became prostitutes, and just because XXers are going to get out of the workforce due to automation, and just because XXers will not be able to support themselves and will not be able to find an XYer to support them, unless they're sharing the top 50 or top 30% of men, this does not mean that XXers will be forced to prostitute themselves. Their parents will not allow them to. And their parents will offer and, in fact, demand that they live at home rather than prostitute themselves. And so then XXers will not only not want to prostitute themselves, they will be at threat of being disowned by their parents if they don't come back and live at home. Their parents will say, hey, you're going to come back and live at home, or else I'm never going to talk to you again if you prostitute yourself. So then, women, XXers being family-oriented, they'll go live at home even if they don't want to, right? So even when things get horrible, XXers will not be prostituting themselves in huge percentages. Sure, in Weimar Germany, XXers were prostituting themselves in huge numbers, but most men had jobs back then. There was no automation taking a huge percentage of jobs that were normally taken by XY people. You see, so back then it was totally different, because all the XYers could afford to pay the XXers to be prostitutes, because all the XY people still had jobs that needed doing. But now, they have automation, so you don't need a whole bunch of XY people to work. And so a lot of XY people aren't getting paid or won't be getting paid very soon. Already, and unemployment is huge, but it's going to get way huger. So, it was totally different back then. So you can't use, all the prostitution during Weimar Germany as an analogy to today, because it's totally different because of the automation problem. XXers are only going to sell sex if both, number one, they need the money to survive, and number two, they can find clients to pay them to have sex. If men are unemployed due to automation and are therefore broke, then XXers will not be prostituting themselves because, among other reasons, they wouldn't be able to find clients who could afford to pay. At least not enough paying clients for a large percentage of XXers to become prostitutes. Maybe the top 30 to 50% of XXers will basically be prostitutes for top men. They'll be mistresses. But only because those top men will either be paying those XXers per sexual encounter or will be providing those XXers with food and shelter and clothing and medicine in exchange for those XXers having sex with those top men whenever those top men desire. In other words, those XXers being those top men's mistresses. But even so, that would still mean that a good 50% of XXers will not be prostitutes. Just because all the XY people who have jobs and have money, the top 30% of XY people or top 50% of XY people or top 10%, whatever, all those people, they don't, because they're top guys, because they're top 20% guys or top 10% guys, they don't want the bottom 50% of XXers. They're not attractive enough for them. So that's another reason they're not going to be prostitutes, because the bottom guys can't afford to pay them, and the top guys don't want those bottom 50% of women. Not even if they offer sex to the top guys for free. The top guys would be like, no, sorry, you're ugly. I don't want to have sex with you, not even if it's for free, right? So that's another reason why at least the bottom 50% of XXers will not become prostitutes, neither officially nor unofficially. Maybe they'll be having sex with some of the incel guys, but only because the XXers themselves want sex and love, not because the guy can afford to take care of a kid. Those XXers would actually be terrified of getting pregnant, because, the XXer doesn't have a job, and he doesn't have a job either, so what if she got pregnant? It'd be a nightmare, right? How's she even going to pay to get an abortion? You know what I mean? Like, they would be terrified, those XXers who are having sex for fun and because they want love. Like, those XXers would be really terrified of getting pregnant because the top guy unemployed, like the bottom 50 to 70% of men will be soon, at that time, 20, 30, 40 years from now. I'm not sure how such guys will avoid starving, other than, forming no-go zones and doing their own gardening and refusing to pay taxes so that they don't need to use money at all. The unemployment will probably lead to revolution, and the guys will start forming zones where they kick the cops out and refuse to recognize the validity of the government and refuse to pay taxes. Zones in which those guys survive by gardening, by growing their own food. They'll survive that way, but they'll have little or no money, and they'll refuse to pay any kind of taxes or anything else that costs money. Maybe such guys will trade food for clothing when they need new clothing because of their old clothes wearing out, or maybe such guys will make their own clothing. I don't know. Maybe such guys will be able to get wives because of them being able to take care of themselves, and an XXer. And maybe even a child if he gets very skilled at gardening or owns enough land or whatever. He and the other men that he's with control a huge plot of land. Huge. Like hundreds or thousands of acres. Then they could grow enough food for all the men to have wives and children. And maybe, support some animals and stuff so that they can get, wool so that they can have clothes and stuff too, right? Or maybe the top 20% of XXers will become prostitutes or mistresses, the top 10% of men. The 20% of XXers below them will become prostitutes or mistresses for the 10% of men below them, and the rest of the top 20% of men as well. And the 20% of XXers below them, the 6 out of 10 and 5 out of 10 XXers will be selling sex to the 8 out of 10 men and below. And the guys who are controlling land and growing their own food because of not being smart enough to work, they will be able to pay such prostitutes with food instead of with money. I suppose that's also a possibility. This has been Redshift. Peace trucks for statists.